Beautiful audience, beautiful space, beautiful afternoon. And hopefully, God willing, I know that we will have a beautiful conversation. Yes. However, before we begin, Tay would like to dedicate this afternoon's conversation to his mom, Miss Linda, who cannot be with us this afternoon, so we ask that you keep her in your prayers. Okay. So let's get started.
Yes.
How are you feeling?
I'm nervous.
Why are you nervous?
I'm nervous, but I want to say this. I want to say that all these beautiful people, they know me well. They didn't come out here for me. We came to see you. and I just want to say that I wanted to invite you because of what you mean to all of us. Before we get the conversation started, I just want to say that, the sacrifices that your family have made on behalf of the black struggle and just for the struggle of humanity, we just want to thank you and honor you. So I just want to start the conversation with that. So we can give her a round of applause.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. So, everyone has seen this great book. It is really a page turner. It really, really is. What inspired you to write American Imam?
For me, I think it was a combination of living as a black Muslim, but not feeling like the story is being told in the proper way or has been told at all. And so I felt like my story is unique enough. We all have great stories, but my story was unique enough to put it in a place where it's probably very relatable to a lot more people who wouldn't have the platform or the voice that I could possibly have. So.
Okay. And what story is that?
I guess it's a story about a kid from the ghetto who made a lot of different choices and became confused for a little while. But God decided to pull him from the gutter and save him. And I think that that's a story that's all too familiar with all of us. But the popular narrative about Islam in America, that's not included in it. So I really wanted to highlight my story as a representative of all the many people who have the same story.
And when you say the ghetto, what does that mean?
Great question.
You said the gutter.
Yeah. So when I say the gutter, I mean the proverbial gutter. For me, it was a beautiful place. I was raised in a beautiful neighborhood by a beautiful family. But what I mean by that is that we were society's throwaways. In Roxbury, those people who didn't have access to the breadbasket of goods in America at the time in the 80s. So when I say the gutter, I just mean those who have been considered unreformable, untouchable, so to speak.
The underserved.
Yes.
So tell me then about your family upbringing, and how that impacted your life.
Yes. So my dad left when I was about 5. I'm the youngest of 6 siblings. My mom, great mom, best mom you can have. Everyone loves their mother. But we were very tight-knit. We grew up in a tight-knit household. We each would defend each other and be there for one another, no matter the cost. And so I grew up in a neighborhood where we didn't have video games and stuff. We played outside. And so, we spent a lot of time outside in the neighborhood and just exploring. And, when I was about 10 years old, my older brother, Mel, who's now Ali, he's in the book as Mel, he got into music, and that got me into music.
So it really is great for this next question. How did you start your journey into the music business?
Yeah. Again, in the 80s, for me, the mind frame I'm in now, everything has social and political connections. In the 80s, we didn't have after-school programs, we didn't have like internships at tech, biotech places, and all we had were dreams. And my brother, in maybe 1984, 85, started getting into music, and he pulled me along. We were 8 years, it was an 8-year difference, but he took me wherever he went, and really just showed me that dreams can come true. I remember we would be like in the kitchen, he'd have like a little beat machine, and he'd be making his beats. This is 1985, there wasn't a lot of black celebrities. And he really just took us from there, and in like 24 months, I was on Oprah Winfrey, just from his dream. So really, he was the first person that taught me how to dream.
And I think I saw you on I remember that handsome group.
Thank you.
Yeah, back in the day. So it sounds like it was, when I hear ghetto, when I hear gutter, I think of throwaways. It doesn't sound like throwaway people. It sounds like a rich community, like you had a rich family values, culture.
Yep, I'll accept that correction because I think it is important that we self-define in ways that honor our lived experience. When I say those words, I need to say that look at all of us in the room, look what we became, look who we become. When those people have defined us by those things. So, when I look at all of us in the room and see what we become, come from that experience, those are the words I conjure up. But I'm going to take your reference to note and try to correct that, because you're right. We should kind of honor our lived experience.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm really grateful for from my parents is that they made sure having my mother, because my father was assassinated, she made sure that all 6 of her girls, just like you had 6 siblings, 6 children in your family,
yeah.
I had 6 in my family. And my mother made sure that we grew up with a really solid sense of our identity. Our identity was intact. We learned about the significant contributions women made to the world, the significant contributions of the African diaspora as a first world nation, not as a third world country, but as a first world nation made to the world, and the significant contributions that Islam made to the world. So we grew up with a very healthy sense of ourselves. We loved who we were, and we saw you as a reflection of me as a reflection of you, and this happy story. So when I would show up, right, people would have an expectation, and it wasn't a person filled with love and self-confidence and joy and to say no to drugs and peace. They were like, whoa. So, was there a moment for you where you knew that music was your calling?
Well, first I want to acknowledge everything you said about your mom, Dr. Ilyasah Shabazz, because I think that when we look at you, we think you're a product of your dad, which you are. But we forget that your mom is the one who raised you all those years and made you into who you are, even on your sisters who have all become honorable people. So I think that is important that we bring our moms into the narrative. Now, in terms of your question, in terms of the music, I thought it was my calling. I could dance a little bit. I couldn't really sing, but back then nobody could sing, so it was all good. But I thought it was my calling, but I mistook the idea that I love to communicate, right? I thought because I love to communicate that I would be a rapper or a singer, when really what I love to do is write and talk. And my family knows, and you know me, I love to talk, so, yeah.
Okay. So in the book, you talk about the challenges of the Taurus, that it was negative. And I'm curious to know, what do you mean? What was so negative about Taurus?
So now, Dr. Shabazz, everyone talks about the Illuminati and all these perverted sex parties and whatever else goes on with drugs. But I think that construct existed back then, but it wasn't clearly defined, right? So there was a lot of pedophilia on tour. That's a fact. There was a lot of drugs being done on tour, a lot of people being exploited and taken advantage of. But for me, my experience, although I was a witness to that, I wasn't exploited directly. I had the protection of two great people on tour. Ibrahim Duarte, who was our Muslim tour manager, who's actually in the room today. I haven't seen Ibrahim in 30 years. Ibrahim, where you at? Ibrahim, back then he was a young man. None of us were Muslim, but he was a guide for us, and he was a moral conscience for us. And then I had Richard McLean. He's also in the building. Richard McLean was our tutor. So, Rich, I wanted to give you some props. Where you at? Richie was the first white man I had encountered because, you know, when we were young, we were told to stay away from white people. So why? Why? Because you can imagine why. You know, just the dangers of being engaged in with white people on any level at that time, especially in the 80s. Just wasn't good for us. And my mother, I don't know if she had all the excuses or the reasons why. We just knew, don't go to Charlestown, don't go to South Boston, stay away from these areas. But meeting Richie on tour, he was the first white man I trusted, which in fact allowed me to trust other white men later because of my relationship with him.
Wow. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause. So many musicians, so many people who've been in the entertainment industry who unfortunately didn't end up too well. Mm-hmm. And so you were very fortunate and blessed to have met these two gentlemen.
That's a fact. God sent us.
Yeah. So how did you become a ghostwriter for and first you should tell everyone which Dr. Dre.
Okay.
How did you become a ghostwriter for Dr. Dre? What was that experience?
Okay. Dr. Dre, of course, the great hip-hop music producer, the guy who has the Beats headphones. In about 1996 or so, what I like to call my OG, who was a great mentor to me growing up, taught me a lot of ways on how to be a man. Big Chuck. He's also in the building. Chuck, where you at? Yes, sir. Big Chuck, at the time he was working with Dr. Dre, and he told me before he left Boston, I'm not going to forget about you. So when he got to LA, Tupac had died, and so he called me whispering one night and said, like, look, I got Dre, we're going to be in Vegas in 2 days. I need you to write a rap about Tupac against Dr. Dre, going against Tupac about, let Dr. Dre hear it for you. He said, I'm going to call you in 2 days. Wow. Yeah, so 2 days later, I sat down and wrote, I love Tupac, but I wrote everything I could. I could think of mean about Tupac because I wanted to get to California. So, 2 days later, he put Dr. Dre on the phone, and I said my rap, and a couple days later, I was in California with Dre, recording.
Do you want to give us a little sample?
No, they moved me out the room. I don't have it. It's funny.
Small sample?
It's funny. I was out there with Dre, and I thought, like, this is it. All my dreams are going to come true. Chuck had something to do. He left me there with Dre, and, we were hanging out. And I was like, this is it. I made it. And I was writing a song called King Midas. So I get in the studio. Dre's not there. I get to write it. It's like horrible. It's the worst thing I ever wrote. No one's impressed, and I can tell like I blew it. So I go back to the hotel, and they just left me there. Wow. They just left me there for weeks, days and weeks. It felt like weeks until finally they called me and said, "You're fine. You can go home now." So what I thought was a great disappointment turned out to be a great blessing.
Why is that a great blessing?
Yeah, because I don't think I would be alive right now if I had been allowed to indulge. And Chuck wouldn't allow me to go too far and indulge too much because he was very protective of me. But there was a certain point where even he couldn't hold me back to who I thought I wanted to be. So I would have probably been dead or in jail by now if I had, gone that way. So Allah was protecting me even before I had become Muslim.
How old were you?
Back then, about 22. Yeah, about 22.
So when did you decide that you needed a serious change of heart and lifestyle?
Yeah. I had a son when I was 19 years old. And despite me running around and getting in all kind of little skirmishes and trouble, I would always go home and give my son a bath and read him stories. And, I was always a present father. And at that time, when he was about 4 or 5, I was in a custody battle for him. And when I looked at my own life, I didn't have anything. I had a job, I didn't have an education. I just had this idea of being a rapper. And then I looked at him and I said, if I want him to be better, then I gotta be better. I gotta start with me. So I decided right then, I'm going to be the man that I need in my life for my son. So that's what I decided.
So it sounds like you actually did have values, morals.
Oh, absolutely.
That you did come from a good family.
Absolutely.
That you did come from a thriving community. Because thriving doesn't necessarily mean that there's money, but it sounds like there was some kind of tutelage. There was something that gave you vision and wisdom and insight.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that. When you frame it that way, absolutely. It was a small community, and like you said, there wasn't money, but there was a critical conscience in it, absolutely.
So critical consciousness sounds important. So why did you choose Islam?
I always say, if I had been, and that's the thing, is that the Elliott Church, they were practicing the social gospel on us. After school, they would take us they would let us into the church, give us what they're called juices, and teach us how to do our homework. But I think by then, the branding for Islam was just better marketing, right? We had hip hop, Big Daddy Kane, we had Eric B and Rakim. They were saying Islamic things in the raps. So the branding for Islam was just stronger. And at the time, Christianity for us had become this old wrinkled thing. That was a failure because we looked at the results of the civil rights movement coming out of that into the 70s and 80s. We were like, man, it failed us. We're still here. And so those storefront churches, and we just looked at that like, I don't want to be that. I don't know what I'm going to be, but I don't want to be that old broken down person who's just saying, wait till you meet God. So I think that even though Christians were doing the work, and they had put in the work for us to have our voting rights and everything else we had, for the most part, along with your dad and that movement as well. But for me, it was the appeal of being both self-conscious about myself, about having self-knowledge, knowledge about God, but then knowledge about the environment, the political, social climate. And I think that Islam was the only vehicle that offered that at the time. Through hip-hop, Tribe Called Quest, they were actually talking about issues that matter. Rakim, he said, he never swore in his raps. He said, all praise is due to Allah, and that's a fact. Big Daddy Kane said, Assalamu alaikum. And Rakim said, I only eat fish, which is my favorite dish. But without the money, it's still a wish. And for me, that was like talking about healthy eating. We were just talking about healthy eating upstairs. And for us back then, living in food deserts, for a man to say, I prefer fish. And if I don't get fish, I'm not going to eat. Those kind of principles, they stuck to our hearts, in ways that, showed up in Islam later on.
And I think that was one of the reasons why my father and his siblings were attracted to the Nation of Islam, even though he practiced Sunni Islam, which is in jail.
Yes.
People don't
really?
know that. Yes.
Wow.
that he learned from a Pakistani Muslim.
Okay.
But that the reason they were so attracted to the Nation of Islam is because it provided a strong sense of self, right? That you got to see biblical characters, Quranic characters as people of color coming from this first world, Africa, you know, in that whole area. And then when you go into the Christian church, even being Baptist, because I went to lots of Christian churches, my uncles were Baptist. What is the one where you start jumping up and down, running around in the room?
Pentecostal.
Pentecostal, yes. My uncles were Pentecostal. When I would go to some churches, I would wonder, where's all the rhythm? When are they going to start jumping up and down? But I realized I had an epiphany when I was not until my late 30s that was Pentecostal. But just having this strong sense of self and being able to see yourself in that spiritual realm.
Yes. Yes.
And know that.
Exactly. Representation.
Yes.
Very important.
Right. Representation matters. So then, what was the biggest sacrifice you had to make in choosing Islam?
At the time, I think it was music. At the time, I think it was music. Because I thought, again, even becoming Muslim, I thought music was my future. You know, I continued to write songs, and I was writing some songs for Keith Sweat, and some other R&B singers. And I was like, this is the way I'm going to get out of the hood. And so, you know, at the time, you know, the people around me was like, no, that's not going to happen. You know, stick to your day job. And that was hard for me to hear, but I knew that Allah was calling me to something else, more prolific, more profound. So I knew what I had to do. Even though it was tough, I knew I had to make music better.
That's beautiful. Even though there is music in Islam.
That's right.
But just not that certain kind.
That's right. That's right.
But it sounds like you already were value-based. So what are the contemporary concerns of Black Muslim Americans, especially in light of various historical figures?
Yeah, right. I think our contemporary concerns, that's a broad question. I can answer for myself, and you know, I can kind of guess for other people. I think we need access. We don't have access in terms of education, Islamic education, in terms of like things being accessible, creating gateways for our young people to accept Islam in a way that we feel, you know, we feel beautified by Islam. But our young people, a lot of times, the way it's put on them, it's under a Middle Eastern construct, which for us African Americans oftentimes is punitive. So we need it to be beautified. We need accessible points, as you mentioned, representation, right? We need Isa Maria, we need Jesus to become a homeless man of color being harassed by police. We need to see him in that light, right? We need to see Moses, as a person who's a community activist. We need to see people who represent our particular situated knowledge. I think that's a big concern for us, even if we don't know it. I think when we go into the mosques that are run by predominantly Middle Eastern people, God bless them, but they don't understand our struggle and what we've been through. So I think for us, access is important, representation and embodiment. You know, we want to be able to live out the principles of our faith in ways that are practical, because a lot of us are not going to be scholars, a lot of us are not going to be academic, but we still want to embody the principles of the Quran. And I think those are the religious concerns, at least. There's a whole myriad of social concerns, as you know. We share those in common, Black Christians and Black Jews as well. But the religious concerns are in that area.
Yeah, and that's why, you know, I've written the books that I've written, right? I think it's so important to control the narrative, right? That if that's what you want, then that's the information that we have to put out there, right? To attract our young people to Islam, if that's what your objective is, right? Because sometimes we think we just sit back and wait for someone to come and do something for us that they haven't done all this time, right? Right, and we certainly can't sit back and complain, right? But just control the narrative. So, how does your experience as a Black Muslim American shape your views on social justice?
I think that every person who's black and Muslim, there's an intersectionality there. But I think for me, my black identity is always more disruptive than my Muslim identity. And I think even black Muslim females have a triple intersectionality that needs to be addressed as well. But for me, being black in America, there's always a sense of urgency, a sense of danger, a sense of encroachment on your life. You don't even feel safe in your own bed, right? And I can't say as much just for being Muslim. After 9/11, there was some tension. That has died down. But I think for me, being black in America, it speaks to, I got to address those issues. And I think when I was in the prison system, I went in a theologian, right? Thinking that if I just taught these guys the correct theology and the creed and the rituals, then everything would work out. They'd come home, they wouldn't be gang members or drug users. But what I learned in that process is their identities as black and brown men took precedent over whatever spirituality they were learning. And so until we address those social ills and those social traumas that they had, you can teach them as many prayers as they wanted to. That wasn't going to help them out of their social condition.
That's right, I agree with you. I was consulted on a documentary, Prince Among Slaves.
Oh, yeah.
And what was so fascinating about the story is that finally we had a chance to hear from an African perspective, who was the son, who was the prince. It was a land before Africa was cut up into all these small countries. It was Fujijela, this particular area, and his father was the king. And so they sold him into slavery, and he ended up in North Carolina. And what was so, for me, profound was hearing his perspective that when he came to America, he saw paganism, that the structures weren't any comparison to the structures that were built on the continent. And it makes sense, right? Because we know about pyramids, we know about, the monuments and so forth. But that also they spoke 7 languages, that they were Muslim, so that most of the Africans who were taken from Africa, because there were already many Africans living here before Christopher Columbus, right? We've been here for hundreds of thousands of years. And before they were brought here, that they were Muslim. And so I think when we control the narrative and we show images and put things in perspective and acknowledge, this whole thing of the enslavement, of human trafficking, of bondage, acknowledge all of that, right? That makes such a difference. And so, that's a fact. How did the aftermath of 9/11 affect the black Muslim community?
That's a great question because, and I'm not up here I try to be very restorative with my opinions and thoughts, but I think after 9/11, what happened was the immigrant community who controls the narrative in America became very afraid. And so they pushed us out front as kind of mascots, right? These Americans, these are our brothers, right? And they pushed us to do a lot of press conferences. We would, stand next to them and kind of like hold them up, so to speak. And I think that they would do good to understand the difference between diversity and equity. And so diversity says like, how many black people in the room? Okay, we need more black people. Bring them in the room. But don't say anything. But you're counting. Equity says, come in the room and you have a voice. Right? Your opinion and your perspective is just as valid as mine. So I think that's what was missing after 9/11. We started to see, Imam Taymullah Abdur-Rahman, the leaders of the black Muslim community were being utilized in a way where they began to even push back and say, like, hold on, if you want us to be up front, then you need to take our voices as well, our perspectives and our opinions on what needs to be done to come out of this rut, out of this hole.
So then what are the biggest misconceptions about Black Muslim American experience?
That we're a monolith. There's a misconception that we're a monolith. And I think that misconception also has played a part in Black converts as well. Like when I first converted to Islam, you know, for years, I mean, the first 15 years, I thought that I had to, you know, adhere to a very Arabized construct of what Islam was. Like I had to wear a long thobe. I was going outside with a turban in the grocery store. Like you just get an idea that in order for you to be Muslim, you have to fit into a monolith of whatever Islam is. But what I learned is, you know, to believe in God, to have vertical principles, and to manifest it in your life in the various ways that your lived experience allows that, you know, is the only way that God wants you to honor your life. And that when I look around and I see different Black Muslims, I think the biggest misconception, even amongst us, is that we have to be one way in order to honor God. And that there's many different ways to practice Islam, and there's many different ways to show up as a Muslim. And I think that we would do better if we honored one another in that way.
Yeah. Because even when you go on the continent, there are Muslims in Sudan, there are Muslims in Gambia, there are Muslims all over, but it's really the culture and the traditions that dictates how they practice Islam.
And when we become Muslims, African Americans, we're taught to hate our culture. So we drop everything. We lose family members, loved ones, because we say, I gotta be like this, I can no longer enjoy those cultural things. But then if Allah favors you and blesses you and gives you grace, over time you start to implement those things that weren't destructive back into your life, those cultural practices. So yeah, we dancing back in our house.
Well, you know, one of the things I experienced, so I used to go to the Christian church all the time. I used to go to Baptist church on Sundays. I really enjoyed it because I reveled in the history of my ancestors with the gospel and all that. And then I made Hajj. And when I made Hajj, what I heard was something that was just complete peace.
Mm-hmm.
It was just this state of nirvana.
Yes.
And when I came back and I went into the church, I heard, Jimmy said, don't talk to the such and such. And it was something that was chastised.
Yeah.
And what I gathered is that this was the dysfunction of slavery and how it had affected the way that we gave praise.
So true.
So I just found that really, really interesting. And so when I was reading your book, I saw this word abolition. And I said, this is really great because when I think of an abolitionist, I think about an abolitionist against slavery. But you, so brilliant. Thank you gave that word, brilliant. Absolutely. Stand up, please. Go ahead, just stand up. Yes. You so brilliantly use this phrase, prison abolitionist. So can you explain what is a prison abolitionist?
Right, thank you for that. I didn't invent the phrase, but I'll take credit for it tonight.
Okay. I've never heard of it. I thought it was genius.
Thank you. Well, first I would like to reveal permission, Dr. Shabazz, is everyone who's a returning citizen here, if they can stand up, we can give them a round of applause.
Because that is not an easy journey. Once you've gone behind those prison walls and experienced, you know, this kind of conditioning, it is not an easy. It's just not. It's not easy. And I had a young man that I let stay at my home, and when I would go into the room to see how he was doing, he would be in the bathroom in like this little small space, sitting on the floor, and I just felt, you know. So it's not an easy make you transition back into society. So God bless you.
Yes, yes. For me, you know, I think a lot of white people, when you hear prison abolition, they think like, we can't get rid of all prisons, right? Because there'd be crazy people running around. But what it really means is getting rid of the conditions that make prisons necessary. And what that means is like, when you go to prison, there's this argument of, there's an argument of going to prison for punishment or as punishment. It should be you go to prison for punishment, right? I'm sorry, as punishment. So you get to prison, that's your punishment. You have deprivation, you're away from your family and the compass of the choices you want to make in life as punishment. But what I've seen, what I've witnessed, is it becomes going to prison for punishment, right? Those administrators and some of the COs, not all of them, but many of them feel as though it's their right and they have license to punish you because you're in prison. Now the punishment starts. Now I can tell you how to walk or how to talk or what to wear or how to eat and, you know, where you need to sleep at and how you need to address me. That's not why I'm here. I'm still a human being. I'm a man. And that's why a lot of violence happens, because there's a certain point where it's like, okay, at a certain point, I'm still a man. And when you violate that, then you take it somewhere else. So prison abolition, what it does is it says, let's look at each individual and tailor-make a holistic learning plan for them to come up out of the trauma that they've experienced as system-affected people. Right? People affected by the welfare systems, children, where there was morals-based laws that prevented their mothers from receiving benefits, that in turn led them down the wrong path to provide for their families, affected by the systems of criminal justice, the systems of education, and the systems of employment, in fact. So I think that when you address the systems that are put in place, then you take it from being, you know, a perpetrator, a person who's just simply a perpetrator, and you look at him or her as a full complete human being. And that's what's missing.
Yes, absolutely. And so when I would have young people, old people, they would say, well, who's Malcolm X? What did he do? And so I remember, and it made me think of this, you know, when I was reading the book. Malcolm was only in his 20s when the world learned of him. And it was during a time when young people were marching and protesting, demonstrating for quality life, for integration, for all kinds of things. And Malcolm came along and said, no asking. We demand our human rights as your brother. We demand our human rights as ordained by God. And so what you're saying is, yes, respect and honor my humanity. I'm not here for you to bully me and commit all of these heinous acts that have been committed historically, even, you know, as people who were enslaved.
That's right.
And so, you know, I just found that really just so eye-opening. In what ways can individuals contribute to the fight for social justice and prison abolitionists?
Thank you for that question. I think the first thing you have to ask is like, is this where I want to be? Because this is not for people who have suffered for it. Right? You know how when you see people, you see it on social media, you see it on TV, they're in the swamps, wading in the swamps, and they're dealing with alligators, and they love to jump in the water and kiss the alligators and the snakes. And some of us look at that and say like, wow, how could you do that? Now I'm not equating human beings with animals, but what I am saying is that that's their calling, right? A lot of people come to speeches like this and the gatherings and feel as though they want to get engaged and involved, but you can't do this work halfway. You can't do it with a pinky toe inside. So my thing would be to say, how do you want to get involved? And first ask yourself, are you ready to risk one of the five? All of us are afraid of losing one of the five. Either losing our family, our reputation, our provision, our freedom, or our life. If you can't sit and say, I'm prepared to lose one of the five, then go find some other social justice issue, or go save the whales, or go move on with something. It's not something Are you guys enjoying this conversation?
imam on college campuses?
Right. I would say the difference is that they have a lot of the same issues. You know, a lot of the uncertainty, depression, anxiety, doubt. You know, a lot of Muslim men and non-Muslim men in prison. This is the issue. They have a lot of these kind of setbacks that allow them to, you know, do other things because they don't have choices. And I think that's the difference with university chaplaincy, is that they've been exposed to choices, have the same issues, but they have better options, more access, right? And frankly speaking, the Muslims on university campuses, their parents were usually first-generation Muslims, immigrants who came over here on, you know, some semblance of the Immigration Act, so they received some benefits in the country. And so they kind of got a head start, and so they were able to provide for their children, so their children could make better choices. But make no mistake about it, those children had been placed in the same environment as those black and brown men who ended up in prison. They would have been forced to make the same decisions as well.
So how do you envision the future of interfaith and interracial dialogue in America?
Yeah, great question. Allah says in the Quran, it says, "O people, we created you from shu'uba wa qaba'il." We created you from, and made you from nations and tribes, and He gives you a reason why. So nations, you know, is geography, and tribes is genealogy. Nothing about ethnicity or race, no hierarchy there. We created you from nations and tribes, and made you into these nations and tribes, so that you would get to know one another. So the key is to recognize equality and difference, right? That we're all going to show up different. And that Allah Himself says, get to know one another. This ain't to rank who's better or who's not. But then He says something that I think speaks to your question, which is the most important thing. In the light, He says, but by far, the most important thing in the sight of God, the best men are those who are the most righteous. And so, to me, this is the most anti-racist, sacred verse in all the faiths. And if you're Jewish and you're Christian, I know you might be saying, well, we got some anti-racist verses too. That's good, live them. But for Islam, this is an anti-racist verse that says, listening to others is not diminishing. Right? I can listen to my Jewish colleague and not be threatened by his theological framing, not be threatened by the way he shows up in the Word. I can listen to my Christian colleague and understand and actually appreciate and revere the way he or she shows up in the Word. And I think Muslims have to recognize that listening is not diminishing. Showing up in spaces where you have to share the opinion and come up out of your silo is very important, because oftentimes we think that showing up in space where someone says something against that's antagonistic towards what we believe, that automatically puts us at risk of, you know, selling out Islam and being under the threat of God's wrath. But in fact, God knew what He was doing. He made us all different on purpose. So it's not up to you or I to step in a room with someone who has the same social objectives as you. They want to cure hunger. They want to give the homeless some housing. And then you will separate based on some theological framing. That doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. And that's why our values are extremely important, whether we're Muslim, Christian, whatever.
That's right.
So what role does interreligious dialogue play in the fight for abolition and justice?
If we look at the original abolitionists, they weaponized the Bible, right? In a way that the racists, the supremacists had weaponized it for 400 years previously, right? So they re-weaponized it in a way that calls for liberation and emancipation. And I think all of us have to look at our books and weaponize our stories, weaponize our faith in such a way that when we sit down, we become groupers and not splitters, right? I did something with a rabbi in Northeastern where we said, okay, we both had Abraham in our faith. What does your story say about Abraham? And then I interrupt you when the story is different, and I'll tell you what my story says. And there was no tension. There was joy. Because the world is better with people.
So how do you view Islam now? In light of the different phases you went through, from conservative to somewhat liberal, and your college chaplaincy to now?
Yeah. What I believe hasn't changed. How I believe has changed tremendously. I believe that there's a capital I Islam, and then there's a small I Islam. The capital I Islam, the branded Islam, the Islam that we see on TV, you know, it's food, it's culture, it's clothing. It shows up in the mosques one way. That's the branded Islam. But the way I see Islam now is small I, which is this Islam that you would submit to God while recognizing His oneness, His monotheism. And I think true submission is being lost on many Muslims. True submission, right? We become a religion of people who practice rote ritual without thinking. And I think we all need to raise our objectivity and begin to question. The throne of God is not going to shake if you say, hey, I got a question. Your little life, my little opinion, my little thought is not going to shatter the throne of Allah if you ask a question. And I think that fear has been placed in us that if I ask a question, I somehow doubt my faith or I'm doubting Allah. When Allah, in fact, says tafakkur, tadabbur, He says think, contemplate, more than He says believe, because He gave you a mind to think. And so now when I look at my entire story, I say, man, when I was running around in the street and doing, very confused young man, no one came to save me. God put it in my heart and my mind to go where I need to go. And the same God that inspires you that way, He's not going to humiliate you if you become a constant seeker. So I would just say that we need to continue to be artists, to be seekers of truth.
If I wasn't Muslim, I sure would convert to Islam right now. Say that our memory is in our DNA. Right? So how do you balance your roles as an educator, social entrepreneur, and a religious leader?
Not well. I'm all over the place. I don't do it well, but I'll tell you, I have a strong support system with my family, my household, my children. So they cover for me. They cover for me tremendously. I'm a person who, I was taught to dream early. And so I think having dreams and having hope is what my fuel is. It's what my fuel is. But that can oftentimes lead to negligence in a lot of ways. When you dream too big or dream too soon or dream too premature. And I would have to say that, my wife and my children have always been there and endured through all my crazy dreams and schemes and have always held me down. So it's not really anything I'm doing. I would give you credit to them.
So who are some of your heroes today?
Ilyasah Shabazz, Imam Taymullah Abdur-Rahman. I always say that, I find myself today older than my heroes. And that hurts me in several ways because they didn't need to live to see the life that I've seen. But I also know that they're in a better place than me. They probably feel sorry for me here on earth. But I would say that Ilyasah Shabazz, King Abdulaziz, as son, the first king of Saudi Arabia, this man was a very ambitious man, and he was full of justice and righteousness. I would also say Dorothy Day, the Catholic activist, Thomas Merton, Rabbi Abraham Heschel. These people have had a profound effect on my life and the way I view the world, and they helped me through some difficult times when I had a lot of internal conflict about right and wrong. I think one of the greatest lessons in my life is being exposed to other worldviews, because it only affirms and strengthens your conviction and yourself. So.
That's right. And that is the beauty of living in America also, right? That we have such diversity. And just imagine if we embraced it, rather than fall for these divisive tactics of separating and not wanting to learn about others, but that we embrace and take advantage of this opportunity to learn about so many different cultures and traditions and so forth. How do you hope your book will impact readers and society at large?
All of us have a great story. All of us have a great story. I think for me, I have a little life. I understand my life is just a little life, but it's my life. And I've been able to claim it in a way that's brought me great joy and grace from Allah. I would say I want people to be hopeful. I want people to be hopeful. Hopeful that their condition can change from not so good to better, but also that human beings are constantly lifting each other up and working for each other. So just hope in humanity, hope in God.
Wow, that's beautiful. I'm a little mushy, sitting up here pretty tough. You know, Malcolm was only in his 20s when the world learned, and he was gunned down at 39 years old, having made such an enormous impact. And I'm sure that all of these individuals, because each of us will inevitably transition, right? What matters is what are we doing with our lives now, right? And you seem to be making a really great gift, inspiring, empowering, informing. So, I'm inspired. Where can the audience learn more about your work and get involved?
Thank you. I know everybody here mostly, so. Call me, no, but spendthem.com. Spendthem.com, we're working on it. We're building it out now. Of course, I have Ali here, Swaits here, my partner in crime, my right-hand man. We're trying to build out a high school right now, a restorative justice high school that allows returning citizens to actually engage as educators with at-risk youth. So that's the main component. If you go to spendthem.com, it's all there.
Taymullah Abdur-Rahman.